Ottawa, there's actually a document warning Canadian soldiers, if you are approached by women, this is sort of a last-ditch effort. They're being told to make friends with the Allies, steal food, munitions, kill them if you can. But this is the last minute, this is the last push to try to do as much damage as we can, because we're losing this war, but by God, we're going to take out as many people as we can. So of course, all these Canadian soldiers had been told, British soldiers had been told, you know, women get friendly. So he was loading a truck, and she walked up and said, please, you know, I'm Canadian. And the fellow looked at her and went, And she was rather taken aback, because she thought, you know, Canadian friend. And he said, if you're Canadian, where are you from? And she said, I'm from Nova Scotia. I'm from a little town called Wolfville. And he swore and said, my name is Clarence Leonard, and we are the North Nova Scotia Highlanders. At this point, they were not, she didn't even know that they were Canadian. She couldn't tell by the badges. Anyway, so they were so blown away to find this Canadian in their midst that they took her back, they took her to, there was a clearing station, and she said, they gave me all kinds of things to eat. I had hard-boiled eggs, I had all this other stuff. And this one sweet young soldier from Yarmouth, Nova Scotia, came to her and said, I got a care package from home, and these box of Moyer's chocolates, which used to be made in this province, just saying. Let's not get on that. That's for another time. Came to her with the box of Moyer's chocolates and said, this is all I have left, but I'd like you to have them. And she said, if you'd known, she said I was a chocoholic before the war. Of course, she didn't use that word, chocoholic, but she said, I've dreamed about it. You know, she dreamed about food, as a lot of prisoners did. And she said, just the smell of them, I held them in my hands and just inhaled until they started to melt, and then I put them in my pocket. And when she met Alan Kent, who was from Halifax but working for the Toronto Telegram, war correspondent, he talked about her sticking her finger in her pocket and actually picking up these little crumbs of chocolate and eating them while he was interviewing her. And she said, I know it's not ladylike, but you'll forgive me my guilty pleasures. I've been deprived for a very long time. So she met them, but they were so, you know, they still had to do the right thing. So she was taken by a couple of soldiers from Ontario, almost back to the place where she'd started, so that she could be investigated to make sure that she was who she said she was. But they would also give her medical care. You know, we were not going to treat her even if we have some suspicion about who she is. So, after her ordeal and the warm welcome she'd received from members of the North Nova Scotia Highlanders just hours before, one can only imagine her confusion and possibly even fear upon encountering friendly soldiers who questioned her story. She could not prove she wasn't a spy planted by the enemy in their midst. She'd not even kept the papers provided by the Burgermeister of Reda, which probably would have worked against her since so many saboteurs had been provided with false identity papers by burgomeisters who retained belief that Nazi Germany could be victorious against the Allies. In light of these events and the intelligence reports mentioned previously, caution and the peculiar circumstances of war demanded that Mona be taken to Canadian Army Rear Headquarters for verification of her story. She was placed in the custody of 2 Ontario soldiers and driven in a military truck to Oldenburg, Germany, not far from where she and Wendelin had started their trek near the end of March. In addition to answering questions for Canadian military intelligence, she was to receive more extensive medical care at a Canadian hospital unit there for the infected sores on her feet, and to be housed in a Polish women's camp which had been liberated by the Allies. I had my first real good bath in 3.5 years with decent soap. They gave me a suit which fit me fairly well, shirt, underclothes, and other small articles of necessity and luxury, so I cast off my filthy prison garb. During questioning by 2 British colonels, a Major Bridges heard Mona state that she was from Wolfville, Nova Scotia, and immediately went to ask her friend, Captain Vincent White, whom knew he had attended Acadia University, whether he knew of this Mona Parsons. White, who, as you saw, acted with Mona at Acadia, was astounded to learn that she was in their midst. He sought out Captain Ralph Shaw, who had been Mona's friend and who was related to people who'd lived across Acadia Street from her in Wolfville. And together they went to the women's camp to see her. What a joy to see them, she later wrote her father and Alma. Then brought me pajamas, silk stockings, a lipstick, plum cake, hard-boiled eggs, toothpaste and brush, powder, lots of money, and heaven knows what all. Again, Mona had trouble sleeping, but unlike her first night back in Holland when she'd spent a damp, cold, and noisy night in a haymow with barking dogs and crying children, this time she couldn't sleep for excitement. But White and Shaw weren't about to leave Mona in a former prison camp. They got permission to take her to a Canadian casualty clearing station. Once there, they had to speak to the surgeon in charge, who, it turned out, was Captain Kelly McLean, quote, an old friend who was at Acadia and in our crowd in 1920 and 21. When McLean realized who she was, he arranged for her to stay in the nurse's residence, where her roommate was, quote, a nice girl from Victoria, BC, who's with the Red Cross, and where I ate real maple butter, chocolate bars, lifesavers, fudge. It was heaven. But again, she had trouble sleeping, this time because the bed, although heavenly soft, was infested with bed bugs. She was given another bed the next night, and equally good and free of infestation, her first comfortable sleep in a real bed in nearly 4 years. On April 22nd, Vincent White was permitted to drive Mona to Holland, to number 12 Canadian General Hospital in Nijmegen, where, though she was a displaced person who would have to be processed through the Repatriations Bureau, she would stay until permitted to return home, and transportation was arranged for her. At the hospital, she was treated to another luxury thanks to matron Evelyn Pepper, a perm. I was extremely lucky, as I'd have to wait weeks for this all-important female luxury, as the waiting lists are unbelievably long. She was given paper, as much as she wanted, and a pen to write to her father and Alma, the first communication with them since 1943. The 34-page letter begins May 3rd and finishes on May 5th, 19... Don't worry, I'm not going to read it all. Describing her life over the last 18 months, including her escape, she wrote, "It's heaven to be with my own race again. I go to sleep to the lusty singing of Sweet Adeline, which comes from the Canadian soldiers in the tents outside my window, and I awaken to the equally lusty rendering of Pack Up Your Troubles. It does my heart good. The food, I might say, does my stomach good too, but I'll have to be careful if I want to preserve a slender line." This was in the day of the Duchess of Windsor, who said you could never be too rich or too thin. Mona proved you could. The news these past 3 days is simply thrilling. Perhaps this week we'll see the finish of this horrible and wicked war. Thank God food is now going into German-occupied Holland. Conditions there were appalling. All our friends and family have been suffering, for they all live in this section. It will be so unbelievably wonderful to get in my own house again. I'm wondering what is left of our things, but that doesn't really matter. People often lose their all in these dreadful days, and the thing that really matters is that one lives, is healthy, and can soon be reunited with one's loved ones. Prison was a hard, nasty, cold, hungry, and demoralizing life. We were always associating with criminals. That should never have been. Political prisoners should have been kept apart. The first year I was ill a lot, weighed only 94 pounds, and was green, with night sweats, coughing, and diarrhea every day for 3.5 months, often vomiting. By the way, she went from 94 pounds when the North Novies found her, she weighed 87. She was 5'8". Tears have run down my cheeks for hunger. When the diarrhea got better, I was given a pint of soup extra, made from turnip and potato peelings, every day for 6 months, and my vitamin tablets, which I had been allowed to keep with me. There were no medicines to be had. We slept in a tiny cell built for one, 4 people to 1 cell. In all the years of imprisonment, I always slept on a straw sack on the floor. I was in solitary once for 2 weeks for writing a letter in English. Fortunately, no one could read English, otherwise another prisoner might have been involved. I got out of it by saying it was only a little story I was writing to amuse myself. We were not allowed to have pencil or paper except when we were allowed to write letters. Practically 4 years of isolation. During my first contact with people, after throwing off my half-witted act, I felt only half-conscious of all that went on about me. My body was shaky, my brain seemed quite numb, thoroughly incapable of absorbing what was said to me. My head spun. It just seemed too much all of a sudden. We'd had literally no brain stimulation all these years. We were forbidden to talk during our 12-hour workday, and at night too tired to do anything but crawl into bed. Even when we weren't too tired to talk, we'd have little to talk about. We heard no news, scarcely. We were not even allowed to have books. But now all that's finished. Now there's so much to do, to read, to hear, to learn. One wishes every day were 48 hours. I'm feverishly trying to catch up on the overwhelmingly great number of events of these last, to me, quite wasted years. My brain is a veritable whirligig. For the last 3 days, I felt quite rested and normal. The reaction to all I'd been through had given me the jitters, and my renewed contact with civilization has disarmed me in a way I had never believed possible. I've got to get used to life again, and to normal people. It's all very strange. Although she was delighted to be among familiar faces, Mona wanted very much to be back in Holland and to find out how Willem, their home, their friends had fared during the war. But she had to wait at the Canadian hospital until Holland had been liberated and the military deemed it safe to return. The surrender was signed at a bombed-out hotel in Wageningen, Holland on May 5th, 1945, and she ends her letter. Holland has capitulated. Thrills and heartthrobs. I can scarcely believe it. And today I'm going to try to arrange transport to get back home. What heaven to be there again. How sweepingly and rapidly everything has gone this week. My joy is almost too much to bear. Now, she wasn't allowed to go home for a while, and when she did, she found out that her home had been taken over by the Nazis, as she feared. They'd stabled horses in her front hall. Her piano, her beloved piano, had been used by the soldiers who had placed glasses, had a great time. And the drink marks, the water stains on the piano, she left there for the rest of her life as representations of the wounds on her soul. And Claudia Tugwell, as far as I know, still owns that piano. In fact, I don't think, because I offered to buy it. She said no. That piano still bears those, as Mona would have wanted. Now, her troubles weren't over. Willem came home in July. He was changed. He had endured ill health before.